In this video we're going to have a look at how the Bible came into being. I think it's important to know how the Bible came into being because it's not a book that just dropped from the sky, but came to us through a fascinating process. And that's important to know. It was a process, but it was really a fascinating process because it took so many years for the Bible to come into being. But the other reality is that it was a little bit of a complex process. But we will realize why it was a bit complex. I think there are four key elements that we need to focus on how the Bible came into being. The first one will be the traditions. The second one will be the languages. The third one, the councils. And then fourth one will be the empires. But to best understand this process is to realize that in this process there had been many debates or disputes. And the disputes actually were about which books needed to be in the Bible. Those books were called the canon, and those books that didn't make it into the Bible, and it is the Apocrypha books. Now the word canon comes from a Greek word that means rule. That actually wants to tell us that it's a standard in which we measure and evaluate something is true and from God. Apocrypha, on the other hand, comes from the Greek word that means hidden. And those books, the Apocrypha, referred to the 15 books of Jewish literature that was written between the Old and the New Testament, around about 200 years BC until the coming of the birth of Jesus Christ. We call that the Apocrypha books, the hidden books, because those books were not considered part of the canon. But we will come back to the canon and the Apocrypha. But in this fascinating process, that was the key thing, the dispute whether those books needed to be in or out. Let's go to the traditions. The first one that we need to realize, it was an oral tradition. So the Bible was, passed on from one generation to the other generation with an oral tradition, because there was no written language and paper to write on. So that can date back about 1,800 years BC, in the time of Abram. And slowly, the oral tradition went over into the written tradition. And in the written tradition, you actually had two things that's important. First, they wrote parts of the Bible on papyrus. That was plant material. And the other one was parchment. That was animal skin. But while they wrote those books, or some of the books of the Bible on papyrus, lots of the other books were still in the oral tradition. So it actually went very, very, very slowly. About maybe 300-400 years BC, you had the whole Old Testament in written form. Let's go to languages. The first language the Bible was written in is very obvious. It was Hebrew. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. And some parts of the Old Testament, not many of them, was actually written in Aramaic. That was a dialect of Hebrew. So some books of Ezra and Daniel were written in Aramaic. And then Alexander the Great conquered the world around about 300 years BC, and then people started to speak Greek. And the New Testament, because it was in the time of the Koine Greek, the spoken Greek, in the New Testament was originally written in Greek. But many Jews started to speak Hebrew, and they wanted the Old Testament to be translated in Greek, and that translation we call the Septuagint. And then after the Greek Empire, you have the Roman Empire, and the language then was Latin. And the Bible was translated into Latin around about 255 after Christ. And then the next language, very obvious, will be the English language. And an important figure in that was John Wycliffe. Wycliffe was an English theologian, and he actually translated the entire Bible, but not from the original Hebrew and Greek, but from a translation of a translation. Only in 1611 the Bible was translated into English from Hebrew and Greek, and that is the famous King James Version. Now we go over to councils. Now there are 3 councils that we need to focus on. The first one was about 90 AD, and that's the Council of Jamnia. That was 90 AD, and that was actually a Jewish council. Now the importance of that council, it was actually opposing the new literature that was circulating in the church, the New Testament books. So they said, we don't like that to be part of our Hebrew Bible. So it was actually opposing those books, and they actually determined at the Council of Jamnia that the 39 books of the Old Testament are their canon. But it's actually in their Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, 24 books, because what we have in the Protestant Bible as 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 2nd Kings will be one book in their Bible, and the 12 minor prophets we have separately in the Protestant Bible will be one book in the Hebrew Bible. But it's actually exactly the same as our Old Testament. So that was Jamnia. So one can say it was about the Old Testament. And then the next one was about 397 AD. That was in Northern Africa, Carthage. The date was 397 plus minus 397. And that was to determine the New Testament, the 27 books of the New Testament. But it's important to note that the councils just actually approve those books that already had authority in the church. They just put their stamp on it. So although the complete New Testament was in written form around about 90 to 100 years after Christ, it took the church more than 300 more years to approve those books as the canon of the New Testament. Many years later, in the year 1646, there was a dispute among the Reformed theologians and the Catholics. The Reformed theologians said, we actually don't want the Apocrypha to be part of the Bible. The Catholics said, yes, it's a good thing for them to be part of the Bible, because those books represent a continuation of sacred writings in Jewish community up until Christ came. Therefore they said, because it paints a picture of the cultural and religious mindset in Judaism before the appearance of Christianity, therefore it's important to include those books in the Bible. So that council, it was a Roman Catholic council, was in northern Italy, 1546, at in Trent. It's, as I said, is located in northern Italy, and they actually approved the Apocrypha as part of their canon. While the Protestants called it Apocrypha because they did not include it in their Bible, but the Roman Catholic Church called those books the Deuterocanon, because their authority was actually recognized later. That means 1546. Then we get to the empires. The first one will be the Assyrian Empire. That was around about 600 years, 900 to 600 BC. The Syrian Empire took the 10 northern tribes into captivity, and they never came back. They just disappeared from the scene. Then the Assyrian Empire was taken over by the Babylonian Empire. That was from 606 to 536 BC, the Babylonian Empire. And they were responsible for the 2 southern tribes, to take them into exile. But they were in exile only for 70 years. because the Persian government or the empire took over, and their policy was that the people can go back to their original country where they came from. So the Persian government said, the Jewish people are welcome to go back to their countries. And then the power swifted, this was the east, swifted from the east to the west when Alexander the Great, when he conquered the world, and he was very strong to impose the Greek culture, and the world started to speak Greek. It was actually amazing. He only ruled for 33 years, but the Greek culture was so strong that the whole known world then started to speak Greek. And Alexander the Great, that was about actually the time 356 to 323 BC. And following the Greek Empire, we get the Roman Empire. So at the Greek Empire, that's why the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and Roman Empire, although they conquered the world before Christ, the prominent language remained Greek. In the time of Jesus Christ, the Roman Empire ruled the world, but Greek was still spoken, and years later the Bible was translated in the language of the Roman people, Latin. So let's go back to the disputes. The canon and the Apocrypha. We see that at the Council of Jamnia, the Hebrew Bible did not approve the canon, and they only observed or comprised the 39 books, or as we say, the 24 books in their Hebrew Bible, and that is actually our Old Testament. The Protestants were the same like Jewish people. They did not approve the Apocrypha, but they have the 39 books of the Old Testament plus the 27 books of the New Testament. It's actually easy to remember. 3 times 9 gives you 27. The Roman Catholic Church decided to include some of the Apocrypha books, so their New Testament or Old Testament comprised of 46 books plus the same 27 of the New Testament. So they approve some of the Apocrypha. The Orthodox Church, that's the Church of the East, Orthodox Church, they actually approve about 51 books in their Old Testament plus the 27 books of the New Testament. So they also approved some of the Apocrypha. I would like to close with a few end remarks. The first one is the word Bible. The word Bible comes from a Greek word Biblia, and Biblia means books. And the word books come from, which in turn come from another word, which is Biblos. Biblos means papyrus. When one considers that there were only 40 persons, many of whom from totally different backgrounds, and about 1,500 years consumed in the making of the Bible truly bespeaks inspiration. Inspiration. A book beyond the scope of mere humankind. No other book has influenced the thinking of humankind and the molding of their character as the Bible. As one person said, the Bible is truly the greatest monument of humankind.